الحمد لله نحمده ونستغفره ونستعينه ونستهديه ونتوب إليه ونشكره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ولا مثيل له ولا شبيه له ولا ضد له ولا ند له، وأشهد أن نبينا وحبيبنا وعظيمنا وقائدنا وقرة أعيننا محمدا عبده ورسوله وصفيه وحبيبه، من بعثه الله رحمة للعالمين هاديا ومبشرا ونذيرا، بلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح الأمة وجاهد في الله حق جهاده، فجزاه الله عنا خير ما جزى نبيا من أنبيائه، فصلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. واللهم ارض عن ساداتنا أبو بكر وعمر وعثمان وعلي، وعن سائر الصحابة والتابعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، عباد الله، فإني أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله العلي القدير القائل بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولقد آتينا موسى 9 آيات بينات فاسأل بني إسرائيل إذ جاءهم فقال له فرعون إني لأظنك يا موسى مسحورا. قال لقد علمت ما أنزل هؤلاء إلا رب السماوات والأرض بصائر وإني لأظنك يا فرعون مثبورا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, and indeed we gave unto Musa 9 clear messages. Ask then the children of Israel to tell them what happened when he came unto them, when Musa alayhi salam came unto them and appealed to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said unto him, unto Musa sallallahu alayhi wasallam, verily, O Musa, I think that you are full of sorcery. So Musa alayhi salam answers, you know well that none but the sustainer of the heavens and earth has bestowed these miraculous signs from on high as means of enlightenment for you. And verily, O Pharaoh, since you have chosen to reject them, I think that you are utterly lost. So we inshallah will try to finalize the topic of divine enlightenment, which that is in the Quran and the Sunnah of Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, and worldly progress. Does Islam stand against civilization? And as a reminder, the tripod that I used for the recipe of our disaster and which have destroyed us since the cancellation of Islam from our lives in March 1924 is nationalism, tyranny, and blind following. And every other thing that is bad stemmed from these 3 things. This is the tripod that stymied our progress and made us the tail end of civilization. This is the tripod which encouraged underdevelopment, following backward cultures and habits and conflating that with Islam. Hence the terminology which I've been using lately, fake Islam. The Quran describes itself as the bearer of the truth, and most importantly as a Furqan. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Furqan, تَبَارَكَ الَّذِي نَزَّلَ الْفُرْقَانَ عَلَى عَبْدِهِ لِيَكُونَ لِلْعَالَمِينَ نَذِيرًا. Blessed is he who has revealed unto his servant the criterion of right and wrong, that he may be a warner to the people. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Anfal, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِن تَتَّقُوا اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَكُمْ فُرْقَانًا وَيُكَفِّرْ عَنْكُمْ سَيِّئَاتِكُمْ وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ وَاللَّهُ ذُو الْفَضْلِ الْعَظِيمِ. O you who believe, if you fear Allah, or if you are God conscious, He will grant you a criterion to judge between right and wrong, remove from you all evil that may afflict you, and forgive you, for Allah is the Lord of grace unbounded. So Furqan means a criterion for judgment or capacity to discern or judge. It's also a means to differentiate between the right and wrong and between justice and injustice. The Quran teaches the standards, the principles, the values, and the honorable morals of Islam. This understanding of the Quran implies that the Prophet's personality, which is the prototype for a Muslim, is the embodiment or the symbol of the capacity to judge. If this is what our mother, al-Mu'mineen Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, was trying to explain about the character of Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, then it means that to be like the Prophet is to have a furqan, which is to be capable of discernment or the ability to judge well. The veracity of the accuracy of any particular opinion depends upon the personality and the reputation of a person with whom it corresponds. The Prophet is on top of the pyramid, followed by the companions, and then comes the companions of the companions, tabi'at tabi'in, followed by the consensus classical scholars, or the scholars in general, our day to day, the consensus of the scholars. And of course, when we don't find any of that in these three categories, the judgment has to be based on the general public interest. While the status of the Prophet is unquestionable, since he is a revelation, it's like I always remind people that when Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam used to say something, the companions would ask him, is it an opinion or a revelation? If he says it's a revelation, they stay complete quiet and they say sami'na wa ata'na, we listen and we obey. But if it's an opinion, they start posing their opinions and giving and taking with him, right? But if it's a revelation, there is no question asked after that, because the Sunnah is a revelation, like I always mention and emphasize. But the rest of the pyramids weighs upon the reason of subsequent generation of Muslims, to the point that today, even to disagree with a companion, a fatwa that was over 1400 years ago, or with one of the classical scholars, leads to be called of kafir, or a denial of the truth, or an innovator, or a mischievous person, or a sinner, and even endangers life itself. Now, Islamic scholars have subtly propagated the myth that early Muslims are far superior in intellect and virtue than later Muslims, no matter what the issue is, and therefore contemporary understanding and interpretations must defer to past understandings and interpretations. And they base this on the hadith that we repeat all the times, that the best of the nations, the hadith of Rasul, the best of the nation is his century, the Prophet's century, that is, and then the century after, and the century after, meaning the first 300 years, right? But now these scholars are taking this out of context. These scholars making it sound like anyone who came after the first 300 years is inferior to this generation, to that previous generation. And it is not true. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, هل يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون إنما يتذكر أولو الألباب. In Surah Al-Zumar, chapter 39, verse 9, Allah tells us, can they who know and they who do not know be deemed equal? But only they who are endowed with insight keep this in mind. This creative interpretation with selective reference to that hadith that I mentioned, tradition, has created a prison from which a Muslim thinking finds it impossible to escape. Even if today's scholars reach to the knowledge, to the degree of knowledge with today's technology, to have more than the previous scholars, they still looked upon as being inferior and not to be taken seriously, because the opinion negates the opinion of the scholars of our successful predecessors. The opinions of early jurists, which even for them were contingent on time and place. You have to understand this. All right, so a lot of these scholars, if they are with us today, the decision or the fatwa they made over 1400 years ago, if they are living with us today, they will change it, and I have no doubt in my mind about it. But this have today become the default for divine law, unfortunately. Human opinions are treated as if they were the very words of Allah, and often there is no difference between the opinion of, say, Imams of the four schools of thought of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah and the laws of Allah. To challenge any of these eminent jurist opinion or even to subject them to a critical analysis is interpreted as an assault on Islam and Allah's defined Sharia. It's like the other day when I mentioned about how these estranged husbands, when they throw the talaq 3 times and they put their wives and kids and families in danger because of that, that needs to be looked upon again. Rather than having the kuffar, the infidels, dictating unto us how should we organize or control our divine laws. The stoning of these days, the stoning is part of our Sharia, our divine laws, that is correct. But to go and apply it when there is no social justice, no judicial justice, no economic justice, no marital, no justice in every aspect of life, and to go and apply it, that needs to be looked again. The idea of the ruling, how we are governing today, that needs to be looked upon again, because of the misery that we are in the Muslim countries, specifically in the Arab countries, because of dictators and tyrants of today. But if you talk about this, right away you're looked upon as, oh, you're causing fitna, you're causing division. I'm like, the way they are ruling today, they are the ones, and the way the sultan, the scholars of the sultans are teaching Islam, they are the ones causing divisions and fitna and tribulations among the Muslim ummahs. Not people who, like me, and students like me and other decent scholars of our ummah today, who are calling for justice and freedom for the ummah based on the teaching of Quran and Sunnah of Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam. But this has led to incredibly, because we stick into the old methodology and the old-fashioned way of thinking, this has led to an incredibly tragic state of things, where to think is equivalent in seriousness to not only launching an un-Islamic project, but an anti-Islamic one. Thinking has been rendered illegitimate in the Muslim world, specifically in the Arab world, because it necessarily threatens the hegemony or the authority of past opinions and the authority of the tyrants. There are many traditions of the Prophet ﷺ wherein he has praised Muslims who would come later, and he called us his loved ones. So never ever let these people who look at you, especially the radical rights or the scholars of the sultans or the tyrants themselves, look at you as inferior and uneducated in Islam and ignorant about Islam. Never ever allow them to let you to say that about you. In one such remarkable tradition, the Prophet ﷺ describes later Muslim as his brothers or beloved, who are even closer to him than his companions. It's because we believed in him and we did not see him. It is not really possible to definitely argue from the sources that the understanding of Islam of later Muslims will be inferior to that of early Muslims. However, Muslim scholars of the end of time or eschatology argues that there will be general moral decay in society as we approach doomsdays. But these arguments serve as crippling purpose. Consider the paradox. If our objective is to revive Islamic society and emulate the moral excellence of early Muslims, then we must at least be their equals to replicate their efforts. Indeed, we have to be better than them, for they improved themselves with the help of the Prophet ﷺ, and we have to do it without his direct personal guidance. The other alternative is to surrender to the inertia or to the inactivity or remain unchanged of history and let things be. Why bother to emulate those who are inimitable? We cannot emulate them. We cannot be like them. If things are destined to get progressively worse as we approach doomsday, then why even raise the call for the revival? It would be destined to fail. Indeed, the general lack of energy and enthusiasm in the global Muslim community suggests that such an implied or hinted condition has already materialized, unfortunately. But when some Muslims look at other non-Muslim societies and remark, like some Muslim scholar did upon visiting the West, and they would say, I quote, "I see Islam without Muslims, and when I am in the Muslim world, I see Muslims without Islam." We realize that indeed for some people it is still possible to produce Islamic values in real life. These conditions simultaneously suggest that nothing is wrong with humanity itself. It is only Muslims who are declining. How, if at all, can Muslims as a community come out of this unchanged status of immaturity and inspire an age of divine enlightenment? I think that the route to this noble end is through collective emergence from this self-imposed ignorance or jahiliyyah and self-defeated personalities. We have to take off this garment of ignorance and burn it. We can never live in our successful predecessors' garments. We have to tailor our own in accordance to the Quran and Sunnah. This task requires major changes in the outlook of Muslim scholars and intellectuals, as well as Muslims in general. Our self-imposed immaturity does not stem from the complete disregard for reason. On the contrary, it stems from the lack of self-confidence and from being, like I mentioned a minute ago, the feeling of being self-defeated. We need to encourage the use of reason, which we refuse to do so even when freedom is available to us. We also need confidence in our inherent capacity to understand, interpret, and apply Islam in our context. Our problem is not the lack of freedom to use reason, but the lack of freedom to use Islamic text directly, to understand the Quran and the Sunnah directly. We are not allowed because we are not qualified. We have to come out from the feeling of inferiority toward the Muslims of the past, take our destinies in our hands and chart our own straight path. Muslims, intellectuals and scholars must stop acting as if they are defenders and guardians of Islam. This position inevitably leads to the conservativeness of thoughts, to be fanatics. The responsibility of defending and safeguarding Islam is Allah's responsibility, and He, Allah alone, has said so clearly in the Quran. It is this fear that Islam will be diluted, misinterpreted, and distorted by contemporary Muslims who are inherently looked upon as inferior that must be discarded. Muslims must stop performing God's task and safeguarding His message and start performing the human task of understanding and acting upon Allah's message and the teaching of Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam. Muslim scholars and intellectuals need to change the psychology of the masses by focusing attention not on what Islam is, but what Muslims do. The artifact of separating Islam from Muslims allow Muslims to have the best religion with the worst followers. That is what blind following did to us. The only way to escape this, in my humble opinion, as a student of Islam, for our scholars and intellectuals to change, to reconstruct the methodology or the how of walking the Quran and the Sunnah, of how we achieve the goals that Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam and the Khulafa al-Rashidin and the Tabi'een and everyone afterward achieved that goal. We don't have to use the same path. We can construct our own path to achieve the same goals. After all, what we want is Islam back to our life. Therefore, it is not enough to glorify. We have to realize that Islamic civilization in its totality, inclusive of its best and its worst. It's also the tafsir, the explanation of the Quran and Sunnah. Therefore, it is not enough to glorify ideas confined to the holy text. They are meaningless unless they are realized in this dunya, in this world. The Muslim community must be made to realize that our generations, the communities after the advent of Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, the seal of prophecy, are among the best of generation too, because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, we are his beloved. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. Ask Allah for forgiveness. He's the most forgiving, the most merciful. الحمد لله وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ولي الصالحين وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Never has God ever trusted a people without a prophet. There are going to be no more new messengers or messages from Almighty. We are in our own. We have the revelation, and so did the past communities. But they all needed prophets to guide them. Even the great companions of the Prophet ﷺ lived life as pagans before, in ignorance before Prophet ﷺ came to them as a guide and messenger. But the present Muslim Ummah has been trusted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to act in its own. The only difference is that unlike the messages of earlier prophets, Allah has promised to safeguard His revelation to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We have to live up to Allah's expectations. We cannot do that until we become capable of acting on our own judgment, until we are strong and courageous enough to understand and apply Allah's message and the teaching of Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam in our times. Maturity and in divine enlightenment at one level means simply living in our times. And people need to understand that. We have to escape the prisons of past authorities and past achievements and focus on our task at hand. Very simply, we must grow up and take responsibility. Be enlightened through the Quran and the Sunnah and act mature. To achieve this noble end, we need to encourage in every possible manner the confidence that we are capable of understanding and realizing the maqasid, the purpose of Islam, from preservation of religion, of life, of intellect, honor and wealth, and foster a culture of tolerance for those who have the courage to think. Any impressive project toward the development of diversity or toward the respect of freedom to believe and freedom to chart one's own destiny will not gain any foothold in the Islamic world until the condition of self-imposed immaturity and self-defeat is alleviated, until individuals, Muslims and their intellectuals and scholars can dare to pass judgment on the present and view their heritage from a critical perspective without allowing the past to prejudice them. Until then, freedom of thought and action, which is a powerful element of Islamic society, will remain beyond our grasp. And I would like to remind myself first and foremost, anew, with the hadith of Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, 2 words, very heavy in the scale of good deeds, very light on the tongue. Subhanallah wa bihamdih, Subhanallah al-Azim. Say it at least 100 times a day. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us to send prayers on Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam when he said in the Holy Quran, Surah Al-Ahzab, إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم ربنا آمنا بما أنزلت واتبعنا الرسول فاكتبنا مع الشاهدين. اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان وزينه في قلوبنا وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان واجعلنا من الراشدين. اللهم ربنا أعنا ولا تعن علينا، وانصرنا ولا تنصر علينا، وامكر لنا ولا تمكر علينا، واهدنا ويسر الهدى إلينا، وانصرنا على من بغى علينا. اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا، وأكرمنا ولا تهنا، وأعطنا ولا تحرمنا، وآثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا، وأرضنا وارض عنا. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون، وسلام على المرسلين، وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. وأقم الصلاة.